how, in a first, Iran launched a barrage of over 300 missiles and drones from its soil, directly targeting Israel. Videos of explosions and fireballs over Jerusalem have exploded across the media as Israeli air defenses work to thwart Iran's attack. Israel's main ally, the US, too, scrambled its jets and took down some of the missiles headed towards Israel. US President Joe Biden and Netanyahu held a telephonic conversation where Biden pledged his ironclad support for Israel. The IDF has said that 99% of the drone or missiles were shot down before they entered Israeli airspace, and that some of the launches were from Iraq and Yemen.
אמש איראן פתחה במתקפה נגד ישראל ושיגרה יותר מ-300 איומים מסוגים שונים. האיום האיראני פגש את העליונות האווירית והטכנולוגית של צה"ל בשילוב קואליציה לוחמת חזקה שיחד ירתו את רובם המכריע של האיומים. ירתנו 99% מהאיומים ששוגרו לשטח מדינת ישראל. זהו הישג אסטרטגי משמעותי מאוד. בנוסף לשיגורים מאיראן, בוצעו מספר שיגורים. משטח עיראק ותימן, אף אחד מהם לא חדר לשטח ישראל.
However, the nation did add there were a small number of hits sustained by the nation, including one at an IDF base in southern Israel. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the nation was preparing for a direct attack by Iran and that they are prepared both defensively and offensively.
בשנים האחרונות, וביתר שאת בשבועות האחרונים, ישראל נערכת לאפשרות של תקיפה ישירה מאיראן. מערכות ההגנה שלנו פרוסות. אנחנו ערוכים לכל תרחיש, הן בהגנה והן בהתקפה. מדינת ישראל חזקה, צה"ל חזק, הציבור חזק.
Since then, Iran has closed its airspaces, while Israel, that had shut its airspace, has now reopened it. Meanwhile, Netanyahu convened a war cabinet meet. This, as the UN Security Council is set to hold an emergency meet. Additionally, Joe Biden is set to convene a G7 leaders meet today. The attack has been dubbed as a retaliatory attack for Israel's killing of an Iranian military commander in Syrian capital of Damascus earlier this month. But let's also tell you, meanwhile, India has expressed concern over the escalation of hostility between the two nations. Calling for a threat to peace and security in the region, India has urged for immediate de-escalation and restraint. As we continue to track this development, let's also tell you, with the escalation in the Middle East, flights to and fro from Europe and the UK are set to cost more. This, as domestic and international airlines have started avoiding Iranian airspace with the looming threat of conflict. This would mean that flying time is set to increase by at least an hour, likely sending airfares northwards.
Well, as the tensions increase in the West Asia, primarily between Iran and Israel, after the attack that Israel had carried out against an embassy of Iran in Syria, reports from the US as well as several other countries are predicting that a counter-attack may be launched from Iran as well. And that is why the airspace of Iran is being primarily not used, primarily avoided with several international airlines adopting for a diversion. That is why the time between, say, an India and London flight as well, Air India flight, the time increases because of that, because you can't fly over Iran. A conscious decision has been taken, and the diversion is leading to more time, as well as the charges of the flights have also increased with more fuel consumption that has to be considered as well. Be it Lufthansa, be it Qantas, several other international airlines have also followed in the same decision. Air India also following suit, wherein Air India flights are not using up the airspace of Iran, and instead using a diversion, which basically is increasing the flight travel, flight time as well, and the increase in flight tickets also that basically have been incurred or from the passengers.
My guest joins me on the show for a better perspective on how he, of course, views this. Pathikrit Pain, geopolitical analyst, joining me on the show. Pathikrit, thank you very much for taking the time out and joining us here on Mirror Now. In fact, of course, let me begin by asking you this. This is the first time direct attack by Iran on Israel, the magnitude of what we're also looking at. What do you make of this?
Thank you so much. First of all, let me tell you, I think the whole of Middle East is getting entangled into a vicious cycle of violence. I think, there has been this violence. If you look at from the perspective of what happened, what triggered most of these was the October 7 Hamas attack on Israel. It was a brutal terror attack, and there were telltale signs that Hamas could not have done it on its own without a massive support, logistical and intelligence support from a major, intelligence organization of any country. And there were fingers which were pointed towards Iran. When the attack, when there were retaliation by Israel into, Gaza Strip, there were the Houthis and the Hezbollahs have done everything they could have done to harm Israel. There were blockades in the whole of Red Sea, Gulf of Aden. Hezbollah did a lot of rocket attacks. Hezbollah, Hamas, and Houthis are all proxies of Iran. It's a well-known open secret, and they all use all kinds of arsenals provided by Iran. So it was all but evident that at some point of time Israel will retaliate. Most of the time, the Israeli retaliations into Iran over the last several decades have been through covert operations, assassinations of top leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. This time also in Damascus, they killed some top generals. Again, from that perspective, for the Iranian leadership, if they had remained silent after that, they would have lost the face to their own people, considering that they're already facing a lot of challenges within the country. So it was evident that some kind of attack would be done by Iran. They did use almost 150 missiles and 170 drones. And remember, Iran has a huge arsenal of loitering munitions and drones like this. So what is important right now is to see, if you look at this attack, none of these attacks was actually ensured or targeted at having massive damage to Israel, but rather actually sending out a signal that Iran too can attack Israel. Right now, I think the Americans will try hard, to ensure that there is no retaliation from the Israelis. But I don't think it is possible for the Israelis to remain silent. And invariably, the Israelis will try to do something, whether it is through some counterattack of the same proportion or any kind of covert operations again, that has to be seen. But on one hand, while the Iranians also will try to create a pan-Islamic coalition against Israel, many of the Arab states in the region who have strong relation with United States and have a problem with the rise of Iran again. We must remember there are ethnic and sectarian differences between the Arab Sunni states and Shia Persian Iranians. So it is very important to see what happens in the next few days. If a major retaliation is done by Israel, it will only give rise to, again, as I said, a vicious cycle of violence. It can go to any direction. In this election year, for United States to remain silent and not to defend Israel will be difficult. But at the same time, if it becomes a full-fledged war, I don't know to what extent US can actually finance and defend it, because it's becoming very expensive. For countries like India, we may not directly get impacted. We have good relation both with Iran and Israel, even though we may tilt a little more towards Israel. But I think as Indian government has stated that de-escalation is the need of the day, because the impact of it on the entire price of oil, the oil logistics and all the shipping routes, it will be devastating. It will impact everybody. On a larger scale, if you look at it, Iran will definitely be supported by the Russians and the Chinese. The Americans will invariably support Israel. So I think in some way you can connect the dots about what's happening in the Ukrainian theater and what is happening in the Middle Eastern theater. I think there are dots getting connected. We might consider it in some way. If escalation happens, it's like an extension of the face-off between United States on one side and the Russians on the other side. happening here with two more major players,
Patikrit,
Israel and
as you're
Iran.
pointing
But
that out,
I'm telling you, very
sorry for
dangerous.
interjecting you as you make that point, but since you're pointing out about US and considering the ramifications of this, how you're going to be looking at it for us, because Israel clearly finds support by US and also other countries, we understand France as well. In fact, US has said, ironclad support. If you were to help us better understand this aspect of how they're finding support, not just from US, but also France, and the implications or ramifications of this.
Well, first of all, US has a policy. If you look at some of these major sanctions that US has, something called CAATSA, Countering American Adversaries to Sanctions Act, those were primarily targeted towards Russia, North Korea, and Iran. So Iran has been an arch rival of United States from the time of 1979 when the Islamic Revolution happened in Iran, and a regime which was close to United States was thrown out in Iran. So that rivalry continued from that day onwards since till today. For United States, first of all, military-industrial complex of United States benefits immensely by supplying weapon systems to Israel. It's business for them. So there's a very strong military-industrial complex whose lobby supports Israel. There's a very strong Jewish lobby within United States which supports Israel. So it will be very difficult for any kind of any precedent in United States to say that we will not support Israel anymore. The lobby is very strong. And at the same time, Israel remains a very potent, base for United States to have a stranglehold on Middle East. So in all that perspective, for any president in the United States to openly project that we will not support Israel will be akin to losing that next election, especially if the election is in the same year. So from that perspective, it's very clear Americans will support. Many of the Western European countries also have the same philosophy of being very strongly against Iran. And say they did it in case of Syria and Libya also, who they call as an axis of evil. In case of the Ukraine war also, you would see it is the same type of countries which supported Ukraine against Russia. It was the French, it was other NATO allies along with United States. Same is going to get reflected here. The French, they may not directly want to get directly involved in this conflict, but yes, in certain ways, they would definitely prefer. They would never prefer, I would rather say, they would never prefer an Israeli defeat. That is their core objective. And at the same time, as I stated earlier, while Iran will try to create a pan-Islamic coalition against Israel, and remember, there are religious contexts to this entire animosity. But at the same time, there are many Arab states like the United Arab Emirates, even Saudi Arabia, they are very, very apprehensive about the rise of dominant Iran. And because they have a problem with organizations like Hezbollah or Houthi and their stranglehold and what they do in the Middle East in terms of terror attacks. So it's a very complex scenario. I'm telling you, as I stated earlier, United States will definitely support Israel. But many of the Arab states, including Jordan, including Saudi Arabia, including United Arab Emirates, Oman, they may not directly, openly come out and support Israel, but they will be very, very apprehensive about, say, a situation where Iran would have an upper hand on Israel, because in that kind of a scenario, they fear that Iran would have a complete stranglehold in the whole of Middle East. So for the purpose of maintaining a balance, they would neither want Israel to win, neither would want Iran to win. So it is a very complex situation, as I stated earlier, but United States will keep on supporting Israel, just as Russia will support, for sure, the Iranians. Back to you.
All right, Patikrit, as you say that in terms of the fact that Israel says that they're ready defensively and offensively, that's of course Israel's stance. But how do you see Iran continuing with these attacks?
Well, first of all, the Iranians needed some kind of a face saver after what happened in Damascus. And let me tell you, over the last 1 decade, if you see, there are a large number of top generals of Iran have been assassinated through covert operations in which they have blamed Israel. There are many nuclear scientists of Iran have been assassinated, allegedly blamed again went towards Israel and Mossad. Israel doesn't want the Iranian nuclear program to go ahead because the fear that if the Iranians get hold of a nuclear bomb, they will target Israel. So that is the issue. Iran, over the last few decades, have definitely developed a very formidable arsenal of their own drones and ballistic missiles. And that is the reason, if you see the attacks that happened yesterday night, the missiles did reach Israel probably 2-3 hours later. The distance is almost 1,000 kilometers or more than that between Iran and Israel. But that kind of capability Iran has to actually send out the missiles. But at the same time, let me tell you, the Iranian leadership also would want what I believe is a calibrated attack, where they are sending out a signal to the Israelis that I can attack you directly and through proxies like Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas as well. But at the same time, I don't think they would want a full-fledged war where the Americans get involved. In fact, let me also tell you, the Israelis would also prefer a situation where they do some kind of a retaliatory attack on Iran, and it is so devastating that the Iranians again are forced to do something in reciprocation, in which Americans get forced and compelled to directly get involved in this conflict. That I believe is one of the objectives of the Israeli leadership as well. So that is a situation which the Iranians would also prefer to avoid. So let me tell you again, to cut the long story short, Iran does have the capability to attack, that they have shown. Whether that attack will create devastation in Israel, that's a different issue. Iran has that kind of capability that they have been sending out a large number of loitering munitions that they used yesterday to the Russians as well for use against the Ukrainians in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Over the last few decades, through reverse engineering and through their own indigenous technology development, they have developed that capacity. We don't know what kind of ballistic missile arsenal Israel has. I'm sure they have something which they have not come out openly and talked about, but Iran does have it. As I stated, in the next few days, it will be very crucial to see what kind of retaliation Israel does, because if Netanyahu doesn't do anything, then again it will be a loss of face for him, because the kind of devastation they have done on Gaza, if they don't do again anything against Iran, then it will project that they are reluctant to get directly head-on with the Iranians, which I don't think the Israeli leadership will try to project. So in the next few days, what kind of retaliation Israelis do, even as I stated, the Americans will ask the Israelis not to do something devastating, but something will be done. What its reciprocation would be, whether the Russians will directly get involved, that's a big question mark. Whether the Chinese will again help the Iranians, that's a big question mark. And let me tell you, this is how the Syrian war took shape, when the Russians came in directly to fight on behalf of Bashar al-Assad against the Americans and the rest. I think Israelis and many others want a regime change in Iran. That may not happen, but that's the ultimate objective. Next few days is very crucial. Back to you.
Crucial. All right, Patikrit, on that note, I want to thank you for taking the time out and not only sharing with us the perspective as to how you see this, but more importantly, questions about what could potentially unfold from here.